Hi, this is Ted at Valley of the Dolly. Today I wanted to talk with you about a recent article from International Living. And in this article, they talk about what they believe to be the 10 best locations for Americans to retire in. If you like this content, please hit the subscribe and like buttons, and we'll get going with today's episode. So, this is an article that describes what they believe to be the 10 best locations, and they determine those based on a number of different factors. These are based on the cost of housing, cost of living, visa accessibility and the benefits, the affinity rating that people have for living in that country. So, how comfortable are you? How much association do you feel with the culture? Does it feel natural, normal to you? Also, the climate. What is the amount of development that has taken place in the country? Do they have a lot of infrastructure built for roads, for Wi-Fi, for hospitals, etc.? And then that also leads right into healthcare, right? So have you developed this infrastructure for everyday living? And that would include the development of hospitals and what kind of healthcare is provided in those facilities. So when you look at number 10, this one kind of surprised me because if you go back 30 years ago, right, it was considered really to be about the murder capital of the world. We're talking about Colombia. Colombia is a beautiful, gorgeous country. And Medellin, there's Bogota, there's a number of gorgeous cities that are inside the country, and it has a number of microclimates around it. Today, the murder rate is considerably lower than it was before, although it's still not what I would consider one of the safest countries, and especially if you're off the beaten path, you would still want to be somewhat careful away from the larger metropolitan areas. But because of its location, it has really beautiful weather. It's still very close to the United States when you're talking about time zones, and there's a lot of other associations with living inside of Central America. So I definitely understand why that one was included. Number 9 is kind of the antithesis to me of going to Colombia, and that's going to France. And why do I say it's kind of the antithesis? Because French culture is, highly prized, highly valued. It is a gorgeous country, but it's not a tropical climate like you're going to find in Colombia. It doesn't have that kind of resorty vacation feel to it unless you're down on the Riviera coast along Nice and a number of other cities. And I've got a video that I did with Nice. I'm just going to put a little button up there so you can search for that video as well. And I thought Nice was an absolutely gorgeous location, but I would say France is not, except for the Mediterranean area, is really not that kind of beachy vibe that you're going to get with some place like Colombia, for example. What you do get in France is a much higher cost of living. You get one of the world's best healthcare systems. There are visa options, and there is a tax treaty with the United States, which will allow you to move to France as part of a retirement option. But just be aware that you need to do quite a bit of planning before you would make that move to France, because it does require that you get all of your ducks in a row before you would make that step over. What I also thought was interesting is when they talked about France, they talked about what are the positives. Obviously, development, because it's a highly developed country. Healthcare, we talked about that. And then they said climate. And I think when you talk about climate, maybe you're talking about the fact that a lot of people are living down in the Mediterranean area when it comes to Americans around Nice. And there's also probably the largest expat location of Americans, which would be Paris. And I don't think the Paris climate is comparable to what you would find in Colombia or a few other countries that we have on this list of destinations. Paris is a beautiful metropolitan area, and it's loaded with culture. And I think those kind of elements kind of make up for what you're getting as far as freezing winters, possibility of snow, a lot of gray, a lot of rain during the winter months, followed by a few months of beautiful summer. They also made a point of noting that the number of residency permits that have been issued to Americans between 2021 and 2022 jumped by 26%. So you can see that Americans are beginning to look at France as a true option, especially since some countries have begun to repeal the visa and tax scheme benefits that might have encouraged them to go to those countries. And we'll get to some of that in just a minute as well. And they also note that housing is 34% less expensive in France compared to the US. And yeah, I mean, that might be true, but like New York, Paris is outrageously expensive. Apartments in Paris tend to be incredibly small compared to what you're used to in the US. And it's a huge adjustment, especially when you think of France. You do need to realize that learning the language in France is extremely important. You will have that expat enclave group of people that you will become friends with. But for everyday issues, I think living in France and learning French would really be kind of a requirement. Let's go to number 8, and number 8 is Malaysia. Malaysia, again, this is a much larger country than something like Colombia. And when you talk about Malaysia, one of the first things that popped up was the cost of living. And the benefits of living in Malaysia is a really affordable cost of living. When they talk about problems, they talk about affinity or feeling at home and comfortable as a resident in Malaysia. They also talk about the visa benefits not being maybe as clear or beneficial as in other locations that appear on this list. And the third is really climate. And that kind of surprised me because when you think of a retirement location, you usually think of a tropical location with beautiful weather. And I have not really spent any time in Malaysia, so I thought that was really interesting that they noted that as being a problem for climate. What they do note is that things like housing, transportation, and food are all a third to a fifth the cost of living in the US. And so this is one of those locations on the list where we'll go through this huge scorecard that they have out there, but basically what they're saying is there's a great score for cost of living, and that kind of outweighs the negative or the low scoring factors for this location. And I thought that, it's really saying something that the cost of living here is so beneficial that it outweighs what they consider to be some of the negatives, like the affinity rating. The next one we have on the list is Greece. This one is a country that scored really kind of in the middle of the road for all of those categories, for healthcare, for development, for affinity, etc. And so it didn't score really poorly or really fantastic in any of the ratings compared to the rest of the 9 on this list. But what it has, in 2023, The Economist rated it as the economy of the year. So we all know that Greece has been really struggling the last 15 years economically, and you're beginning to see Greece pull out of it with this huge austerity program, and things have really begun to turn around in Greece when it comes to employment, when it comes to quality of life. All of those things are improving quickly and dramatically, and that's partly, I think, why Greece has made this list of the top 10. And they also notice that there's an affinity that people have for Greece, and they feel comfortable in Greece with the Mediterranean diet, with the type of living that you can have in Greece. They also note the negatives as being climate and bureaucracy. And they say the bureaucracy in Greece is really a problem if you're looking to move there. But that the benefits in this really, in this, for the most part, it's moderate across the board compared to some of the other things. But they note that the cost of living is 30 to 50% lower in Greece than it is in the United States. So here you go again with a location that's much more affordable, and the negatives are muted. They're not as dramatic as some of the other countries on this list when you may have really highs and really lows. This is more of a moderate middle of the road. They do offer you things like a golden visa, which you can acquire after 7 years. There's also an FIP visa, which they call a financial independence person's visa, and that requires that you have about $2,000 a month worth of income to qualify for that. So Greece does kind of make it easy for you if you want to move to Greece and experience the islands and the beautiful locations that are there. Number 6 on this list is Ecuador. And when you look at Ecuador, one of the big benefits, again, this is kind of a hallmark of Central America, is the cost of living. So with Ecuador, they note, one of the biggest benefits, cost of living. One of the downsides is the lack of development, and also some are finding that they don't have an affinity with the culture, so they're not adapting and integrating quickly or well with the culture there. But there is a large number of American expats, and they noted that they've settled in kind of the Sierra, which is the mountain highlands. And it typically tends to be in the high 60s there in the days, or low 70s, and maybe low 50s at night. So it's a very moderate temperate climate almost the entire year around. So it's very pleasant and comfortable. The cost of living is kind of low. And if you're looking for things related to development, so for example, if you're looking for fiber optic cable for fast Wi-Fi, you're going to possibly find that in locations in the cities, but you won't find that in the more remote areas. When you're in the remote areas, you're really in the remote areas. And so that really is a quality of life issue. If you want basic services, you may find more of a healthcare desert away from the cities, and the city centers are really where you're going to find the majority of the services kind of especially concentrated. The next one on our list is Spain. Spain comes in at number 5. And the highlights for this, Spain again is one of the top countries for healthcare. So when they look at the list here, they note healthcare, and they also note affinity, that people find an affinity with the Spanish culture, and they enjoy living in that and integrating with the people in the country. For lows, they note that housing and climate, and I think for climate, what they're kind of really feeling there is it can get really quite hot in Spain. It doesn't matter if you're in Seville or if you're in Madrid; those areas, especially inland, can really get oppressively hot during the summer. Barcelona, I thought Barcelona was really quite pleasant, reminded me a lot of Miami, and along the coast, I think that's a different story. A couple of the other benefits to Spain. So for example, if you're a digital nomad, they offer you now a new digital nomad visa. They also have a non-lucrative visa, which is what a lot of retired people would probably be looking at using to move to Spain. You do have to be somewhat conscious of the districts you're moving to in Spain, since some have different tax requirements, wealth taxes, etc., that are not true across the board in Spain. So you really do need to look at which of those provinces you're looking at moving to. And number 4 is Panama. Panama is considered a country with strong development and also great visa benefits for those who are looking to move into the country. Some of the negatives really go to housing and comparably the cost of living for living in Panama compared to someplace like Colombia or Ecuador. It has a beautiful, mild, tropical climate, and it also apparently has 0 hurricanes. So that really is a big benefit, even if you're comparing it against something like Florida, which if you can go to South Beach or Miami, and after you've seen a hurricane, you can find the street signs, the little green ones with the street signs wrapped around the poles, because those winds have been so incredibly strong, and the damage that unfortunately has been done to homes and people's lives as they've tried to recover from those hurricanes. But Panama is not one of those locations. They also don't require any foreign income taxation, and there are really low property taxes there. And they're also offering a new option, which is the ability to stay in the country for up to 18 months on a telework visa. So if it's something you want to try out and you want to go down there for a year, maybe a year and a half, and you want to work remotely and you're not really ready to retire yet, then this can be a really great option. They also have the pensionado visa, which is something that requires that you make at least $1,000 a month, and then you can, on your pension, and then you can retire there really probably quite comfortably. Number 3 on this list is Mexico. when they talk about Mexico, you're talking about a really large country, right? So you can find a climate that's right for you there. So climate, visa benefits, the ease of moving down there, and a lot of people feel a real affinity for living in Mexico. And that isn't just Americans of Mexican ancestry, but also a lot of Americans of other ethnicities have an affinity for Mexican culture and Central American culture, and they find that Mexico is a great location to live in that's close to the US, that's less expensive, and it also offers interesting things that you may not think of initially. So, for example, Mexico really does have a burgeoning wine industry, and they do produce a number of really great wines. And they noted that in this article that the Cinzento Blanco, which is a white wine in 2019, took home one of the best wines in the world by a blind tasting at the CMB in Europe. So it is a surprising upstart and up-and-comer in the wine industry, but it also offers you beautiful climates in Cozumel and Cancun and on the west coast of Mexico as well. It offers you culture and a large city environment if you want to live in Mexico City. So there are a lot of options when it comes to looking at a country like Mexico. Number 2 on our list is Portugal. And for a lot of people, this comes as no surprise. Portugal has really piqued the interest of Americans and has really brought a bit of a wave here. And when we talk about a wave, it's nothing like Mexico where there's a huge number of Americans living there. There's a lot of other countries, even the UK far outweighs what you find of Americans living in the UK compared to Portugal. When we're talking about less than 10,000 people living in Portugal who are Americans, and they may be issued 700 visas according to this article in the last year. Because of the end of the Golden Visa program in Portugal, because of the end of NHR, which was a tax scheme in Portugal, it may be more difficult for Americans to move to Portugal, especially if you're on a fixed income. It's possible that if you have a public pension in the United States from being a teacher, from being a firefighter, that you may find being a resident in Portugal without being a citizen may be really workable and may work for you. But you may find for a lot of others who are looking to retire, financially it may not be the best option on the list any longer. And I think that's why a lot of people are starting to look at France, they're starting to look at Greece, they're starting to look at other countries in the Mediterranean that offer similar climates. Spain, a country like Spain is significantly larger with a lot of beach area. Italy, Greece, all of these offer different types of visa options and tax schemes to allow you to come into the country. But Portugal does have a really great healthcare system. It's an incredibly safe country. It has beautiful, amazing coastlines. I often say that Portugal is kind of like the California coast, except they've stripped away all of the unattractive portions of the coastline and kind of condensed it into only what are really kind of the attractive portions of the coastline, similar to California. And it's just gorgeous. And the Algarve is a very warm climate. But Portugal, a lot of times it's compared to a California climate, but from my own experience, I find that a Portuguese winter is probably much more similar to living in Portland or living in San Francisco, and has much less in common during the winter months with a city like Los Angeles. Even though the temperature may not be that different, you find a lot of rainy or very cloudy days in the winter months. Where in California, it may get cooler and it may get very windy from the Santa Anas, but you don't have that cloud cover and that volume of rain on a regular basis. You may have seasons where you have a lot of rain in California, but they're really few and far between. And in Portugal, they offer you still the 3 big visa options. So you have a D8 visa for digital nomads, you have a D7 retirement visa, passive income visa, and then you have number 2, D2, which is a work visa. So you do have a lot of visa options left. It's just that some of the tax schemes that were offered if that was a requirement for you to be able to make the move, then that may not work for you any longer. So it'll be interesting to see next year, where does Portugal fall on this list? Is it still on the list? And what have people found as the most important reasons for them making that move to Portugal as opposed to another location? And number one on this list, and take a second and think, pick out the country that you think is number one on this list before I announce it. Because this one kind of surprised me. And the number one on this list is Costa Rica. And that was something I did not anticipate. Costa Rica is an incredibly beautiful location. It has a great healthcare system, especially if you're located in the cities. People find an affinity with the culture. They're comfortable there. They find that the visa benefits with moving across are compatible with what their needs are as Americans. They also note the lows as being issues related to housing and the cost of living. And so they do note, and I think that this is really kind of true in a lot of smaller countries, that although they have a great healthcare system, if you have special needs from the healthcare system, if you have chronic conditions of certain types, you really need to do your research to understand whether or not those kind of specific issues are treated by a panel of specialists, and what their availability is in Costa Rica. Because what they're pointing out is, in a small country like this, they may provide great healthcare, but for special conditions or special situations, they may not have the kind of services that you may feel that you need. And there was a quote which I thought was it. So here's a quote from Matt Rosenstiel, and I think he really put a fine point on this, which is, retirees who need special medical care should understand that access to the appropriate healthcare facilities will be their greatest limiting factor when choosing where they settle in Costa Rica. So he said, determine your healthcare needs and base your search on the areas where you have easy access to what it is that you need. So all in all, Costa Rica tops out this year's list of best retirement locations for Americans who are looking to move overseas and experience life as a retired expat. We will in the future look at where digital nomads and people who are working are looking and finding the best locations around the world. That will be coming up in a very future video. And this is Ted at Valley of the Dolly. I really enjoyed This is Ted at Valley of the Dolly. Please hit the like and subscribe buttons, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye now.